This episode of the Good Living Now podcast is sponsored by our friends at Kuvings. Now, I've had almost every brand of juicer on the market since I started my healing journey in 2015. But the Kuvings Auto 10 has been a complete game changer. It's easy to use and easy to clean. Plus, I'm able to make smoothies as well as sorbets and plant-based milk. So use my code JUICEGUY and save 10%. All right, you know what to do. Get your juice on. Welcome to the Good Living Now podcast, where we talk to real people about real change leading to real health. I'm your host, Harold Leffall, and today we're having a very important conversation about Black men and health. Now, when I thought about having this conversation, I thought about all of the Black men in my family, and I was thinking about my grandfather in particular, because my grandfather, who was a military vet, died in his 60s. And I remember my grandfather actually going blind in one of his eyes because he wouldn't go to the doctor. And it was only when the pain got so unbearable in his eyes that he went to the doctor. And I think that is the case for so many Black men. It's like, it's only when the pain is just unbearable that we go and seek treatment. And by that time, the consequences are often severe. So I wanted to have this conversation with a certified holistic wellness coach, a brother who knows all kinds of things about health and healing, and is going to share with us some real tips and strategies on how we can help one another get healthier. Welcome to the show, Rashan Fuller. Hey, Rashan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Really glad to be here.
Man, I am so happy to have you on the show to have this conversation. We've not had a conversation like this about Black men, and I think it's so important. I was looking at some stats that show that Black men have the lowest life expectancy. Like the average lifespan for Black men is 72 years old. And when you look at all of the chronic illnesses, we're at the top of the list. So I wanted to have this conversation with you to kind of help us understand kind of what's going on and how we can help one another get better.
Love it. Love it. There used to be a term, roots doctor, right? I like that term, but not so much from the perspective of roots in terms of herbs and tinctures and things like that. I like the concept in terms of getting to the root. So much of what we deal with is symptoms. It is far removed from the original source of where the problem is generated. And the more we get into a practice of getting back to the root cause, then the closer we get toward real healing.
Mm-hmm. When I think of Black men, I think of all of the elders that were in my life, and I think about my dad. So my dad, he died when he was 72. His heart just stopped. And I remember one of the things that we found in his pocket when he died was Viagra. And I'm like, why is my dad on Viagra? So when you talk about getting to the root of it, we see and hear so many men dealing with things like erectile dysfunction, high blood pressure, and they're given these pills like a Viagra or something similar to allow them to function, but it's not dealing with the root cause of what's happening, which could be underlying issues that are causing other problems for them.
Absolutely. You know what's interesting? Really sorry to hear that about your father. But if you think about it, he had Viagra in his pocket. What so many men are really after, it is the feeling, the sense of power that comes from the sexual experience. So when you ejaculate, you have these hormones that's released, right? And those hormones are no different than what people seek in drugs. It gives you this euphoric feeling. On top of that, the phallus itself, when erected, is this symbolism of power this symbolism of life, this symbolism of purpose and fertility. And when that goes dark, then there's this sense of no purpose on my life, no excitement, no, fill in the blank. So I think what your father was probably dealing with is like so many men are dealing with, because they don't take the journey inward. They're just lost in the external fixation of momentary pleasure. And that Viagra allowed, Viagra is, they kind of got the term from Niagara Falls. So
Oh.
it's let things flow.
Mm.
So the same nitric oxide that they put in Viagra is in beets.
Mm-hmm.
But because we don't have that knowledge, and we don't understand what's creating the blockage to begin with, your father was looking to feel like a man again. He was looking to feel alive, probably even more than just the sex itself.
Mm.
And we have to address that again at the root. Where does that come in?
Mm-hmm.
How do we fall into that pattern to begin with?
Mm-hmm. And Rashan, why do you think, like in my grandfather's case, why do you think a lot of brothers wait till like the pain is at a 10,
Yeah.
before, we seek help or, tell someone what's going on?
You know, I, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, right? And she was emphasizing that what's wrong? Basically, she was saying, what's wrong with black men? They just will not go to the doctor. My husband won't go to the doctor. I got to chase him to the doctor. And what I had to explain to her is, I've been a black man for 52 years. I'm well versed in the culture of black men. And one thing I can tell you with 1000% accuracy is black men are not cowards.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that we fear doctors, we do not trust doctors. And it is not a figment of our imagination. The Tuskegee experiment, for example, what a lot of us don't realize is that went on from 1932 to 1972.
Wow.
That wasn't that long ago. And when you look at some of the experiences that black men had, and that was with that experiment was with the CDC, which is still a very relevant organization today.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the stats that we quote come from the CDC. So that was just pure terror, where they would randomly get black men who did not have sufficient health care and promise them health care in exchange for doing this experiment,
Mm.
and just injected them with syphilis. Why? Let's see how this plays out with no treatment. Oh, they go blind. No, right? So this is just one thing that's documented. There, you can imagine the amount of different, situations. George Washington Carver, another good example, beyond brilliant, but he was castrated.
Mm.
And there's video of him. Well, it's sound, it's audio of him speaking, giving a speech, and you can hear the high octane of having his genitals removed. And that was done by a doctor. They had a nickname for him. They called him Dr. Dick. His name was actually Richard. They called
Mm.
him Dr. Dick, and he was the doctor for that particular plantation, if you will.
Mm.
So this kind of thing is systemic. It runs so deep. So as you and I know, there are things to be very concerned about in the medical field.
Mm.
But I think if we had to get to the root of it, that's where I think it originated. We have
Mm.
toyed with, played with, experimented with, lied to, deceived.
Mm.
And many of the meds that we end up with are almost more damaging than prior to being diagnosed and given those, subscriptions.
Yeah, man, that is so true. There's definitely a historical reason, for that fear. So, what should Black men be doing to get healthier, just generally speaking, just getting healthier, so that we don't have to, be exposed to, doctors that don't really care for us or not even empathetic? Because, one of the things that I hear so often from folks, particularly people of color, when they go to the doctors, when they tell the doctors their symptoms, their pain, it's almost minimized. Like folks are exaggerating their symptoms and pain. And it's like, so, what, so folks just kind of want to avoid it because they don't feel like they're being heard or listened to.
Absolutely. Well, I think the good news here is that the body is designed in such a way to heal itself. That's number one. So whether we're talking about things that we can do to maintenance ourselves or going into the medical community, either way, the only thing we can do is support the dynamic systems that already exist within the body. We're
Mhm.
not creating any healing effect, right? No pill, no herb, no fasting. Nothing we're doing is anything more than supporting systems that was created by the architect of the heavens and earth,
Mhm.
right? He designed it to heal. And we
Mhm.
discovered that at a very early age. You fall, you cut yourself, the cut heals. You break a bone, it heals. So it was like this the God that created us had already anticipated that we would injure, that there would be sickness, that there would be things to need to heal from. So the factor of healing is built in. That's number
Mhm.
one. That's really good to know.
Mhm.
The number one thing I would say is we need to stop getting in the way of our own body's ability to thrive.
Yeah.
We are the problem. We are the factor. What another way to describe the sickness that we're experiencing, the disease that we're experiencing. Another way to describe that is entropy.
Mm.
Entropy is a force. It is a law that drags everything into chaos. It's dragging everything into a state of disorder. Everything, every material thing. So you see a car, it could be a brand new shiny car. You park it somewhere and you just leave it there for years, and you begin to see it rust and the iron oxidates and things fall apart. That is entropy.
Mm.
Okay. There's only one known thing that actually can defeat entropy, and that is the human cell.
Mm.
The cell is designed to defeat entropy. Why? Because it can add order to itself. So your cells are always okay. So cancer cells are developing all the time, right? Cells are getting attacked, damaged, and that's what autophagy is about. It comes and cleans up these damaged cells, and then takes the protein and refurbishes it
Mm.
into other material. Cells are reproducing itself, rebuilding themselves, right? So the healing factor is so powerful, it's capable of defeating the entropy itself. But when you're eating processed foods, right? When you're
Mhm.
eating animal products and acidic foods, when you don't drink water and you're drinking sweet tea and lemonade and sweet sugary drinks and soda,
Soda.
you know, and you are eating like a carboholic, just carb after carb. You start with your first meal and you load up on glucose.
Mm.
And you get this massive spike. And then you get crashed. and you think your crash is I'm hungry again. So you eat again, more insulin. Now you're insulin resistant, and fat is beginning to build up because what can the body do with these resources but store it as visceral fat? So these are the things that Black men are doing. And because they've never been taught about their bodies and never been taught about real health in particular, they don't find out the damage until, like you're describing, it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
The body's been trying to communicate subtly, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't pick up on the subtle signs.
And then I see so often like people will get to the point where they have a diagnosis. They've
Yes.
been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure, and they're being told to avoid these things. But as opposed to avoiding them, like, well, I'm just going to take this pill. And sometimes it feels like we know better, but we don't do better. Can you talk a little bit about the whole idea of like changing your behavior, even like we know, okay, I shouldn't be having this, but why is it so difficult, it seems, for so many people to make those changes?
That's a great question. Here's what I've discovered from working with people, hands on, because I've asked that question and I've tried to get once again to the root of that. And here's what I've discovered. The relationship that we have with food is deeper than we often give credit to. And this is why doctors, to their credit, have such a difficult time getting patients to make lifestyle changes. And it's much easier to just prescribe. And many patients, like to your point, prefer that. Just give me the pill, allow me to keep doing what I'm doing. All is fine. But when we look at food, there's this history and relationship with the food. It's not just macaroni and cheese.
Mhm.
It's this is what my family eats when we come,
Mm.
right? It's not just fried chicken. It's I remember when my mom
Yeah.
used to fry that chicken, the smell, the scent, and I would come in and she would say, "Baby, would you like to try some of this chicken?" So it's all of that wrapped into it. So it becomes a sense of comfort. It becomes a sense of identity. It becomes a sense of cultural belonging. And all these things are stronger than the typical will.
Mm.
So, in order to change that, you got to get down into the psychological component of that. And I think that's where mindfulness now practices come into play,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's where breath work and meditation and prayer and, you know, things like that come into play because now you're talking about reframing the way that your relationship exists with these foods. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't get that reframing, right, then you continue to do the same thing because it brings you the comfort that you seek.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about reframing, I think, we live in such a microwave society. We want things to change overnight. And when you talk about changing behavior toward food, that often is not an overnight, you know, that's a process, it's like, the idea of giving up a food that gave you so much comfort and you have all these emotions tied to it, just going cold turkey may not be realistic, you know. Where could someone start, who they know they need to make some changes in their diet and lifestyle? What are like some practical things that they should start doing? I heard you mention breath work and meditation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. You know, sometimes I notice, especially with certain audiences, when I mention breath work or meditation, it sounds like woo woo. Like,
Hmm.
like here
Like,
we
what you talking about, bro? What is that?
ain't got to do with anything. You know, I breathe all the time, right?
Right, right, right.
So what we don't understand is things like trauma. And trauma is different than stress because trauma is unresolved. It is unresolved stress. We have not addressed it or dealt with it.
Wait, let's go a little deeper with this, because trauma is such a real thing that, like you said, we don't talk about. And so many of us Black men have dealt with trauma. I
Absolutely.
remember I spoke to a group of men in prison. Many of them were serving life, and they were sharing their stories. And these were grown men who had, many of them had committed murder, who were crying about trauma that occurred in their childhood. These were grown men. And it's like, we don't talk about that enough. And when we have that type of unresolved trauma, that leads to not only drugs, alcohol, sexual, just, all kind of sexual stuff, and even overindulgence in food, because we're trying to, there's this void, there's this pain that we are not talking about.
I'm not talking about it.
Yeah.
And it gets buried down so deep. And trauma can be stored in tissue. And you can experience when you are angry, that's in the shoulders. If grief comes, you feel that in the gut. You can feel your stomach drop, appetite
Mhm.
gone, right? So we know that this trauma can be stored. And the reason why the body stores it is, for whatever reason, the body determines we don't have the strength or the wherewithal in that time to process it.
Mm.
So it stores it. And there's very few things we do that reaches those areas where that trauma is stored.
Mm.
And I'm all for counseling. I think counseling is big, and I think we need more of that. But nothing reaches trauma like the breath. Because
Mm.
here's the thing, the first thing that's taken from you with trauma is the breath goes. You lose your
Mm.
breath. You
Mhm.
begin breathing very shallow,
Tensed up.
tensed
Mhm.
up.
Yeah.
So you lose the breath, and it's ironic because the breath is the thing that will connect you back. Now, the breath won't process the trauma, but it will bring it up, release it, and give you an opportunity to address it. That's
Mhm.
what breath work does. And just to get a visual of that, every time we breathe, that oxygen has to go to each and every cell of the body.
Mm.
If there is any cell of the body that does not get that oxygen in a certain amount of time, it dies.
Mm.
We know where the oxygen goes. We know that the oxygen is the only way that mitochondria can turn the foods that we're eating actually into energy.
Mm.
Cellular respiration, right? So we know the oxygen can get there. And when we're breathing properly and doing breath work, it is like I've literally had people crying and people saying, I just feel so emotional. Like, it really brings those things out. It's a
It's
powerful.
like it's a release. It's a release. It's a
Absolutely.
release. And I remember again when I was at the prison, like all these brothers, they had this angry look and this tense look that was intimidating, and it was, and I knew that was trauma, and what happened. It's so interesting that you mentioned breath work, because they had there was a person there. I don't know what his title was, but he did like a breathing exercise with the guys in the prison.
Yeah,
And that's when that stuff, I totally forgotten about. That's when you saw the tears, and then it was an amazing experience. And I was like, what is going on? What is happening? So
absolutely.
I can imagine people saying, well, Coach Rashan, what are you talking about breathing? So can you give us an example, like, of what breath work would look like?
Absolutely. So I'll preface it with this. Out of all the involuntary functions that we have, like blood circulation and blood pressure, the regulation of temperature and blood sugar levels, our heartbeat. Like, we don't control those things. Like, we cannot say, okay, let me change my temperature real quick, or my blood pressure is a little high. Let me bring that down. Let me meditate and just bring that down, right? But breath is the one thing that can be voluntary or involuntary, and then we can turn and take control of the breath and make it voluntary. The only thing that we have control over like that. And through that, we can control heartbeat and blood pressure and all these other things, right? So taking the breath back is taking our power back. And we'll find, like, if you watch children, they breathe in such a beautiful way. You got to watch a child breathe. Like, they fill the belly all the way up deep in the diaphragm and exhale. And you can see the motion. As we get older, we're panting. The breath is so shallow. We've, gone through so much, and we're not even aware of it. So the breath technique that I really, really love is Wim Hof technique, right? That's the individual known as the Iceman. I've seen a lot of techniques. That one really stood out to me because the ideal of stress is the stress can impact us, but a little bit of stress, right, can also be a healing factor. That's what we're doing when we get in the sauna, right? That's what exercise is when you're taking something to failure. Like, you're introducing a little bit of stress to the body to relieve a larger stress. And breath work is the same. So a good breath technique involves deep breathing in and out, inhale and exhale, and then holding at different access points. So the Wim Hof, for example, is and there's different variations of this. But let's say you would breathe. I'll do a simple one. You would breathe 10 times, deep breaths where you're totally filling the belly all the way up and exhaling all the way, right? Through the nose. You can go inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth, or exhale through the nose, right? But the inhale through the nose is very important. So you would inhale, exhale 10 times. On the 10th time, you would totally exhale all the way out and then hold. And I'm at a place now where I hold for, I would do that in my practice. I would do that 30 times, breathe in 30 times, and then hold on the exhale. And I would hold that for about 3 minutes. But if someone was just getting started, I would recommend, if you could do 45 seconds, that would be great. So on the exhale, you hold 45 seconds. Then you inhale, hold that 45 seconds. And then you do the 10 count again. In, out, in, out. On the 10th one, you exhale completely, hold 45 seconds. And you do 3 rounds of that. And you'll see sometimes people are lightheaded. You can't do this. I do not recommend trying this while driving or any place where you need your awareness. But be someplace comfortable, back erect, and it is amazing. You'll feel the energy shift. Feel it immediately.
Now, is this something you should do like every day, in
day.
the morning, every day?
Every day. I like to start the day with breath work. And I before you go running out into the external world, if you haven't set your emotional quadrants or your emotional set points, determine how emotionally I'm going to be, and then take that into the external environment, as opposed to just running out and then getting in traffic and someone cuts you off. Hey, because you haven't taken the time to say, this is how I'm going to interact with the external environment, regardless to
Right.
what I'm being presented with.
And that's so important what you're talking about with the breath work and centering yourself, because Black men, we are stressed and we have been stressed all the time we've been in this country. And so it's important that we do things to help center ourselves so that when we go out into the world, we're not as triggered by some of the stuff that we have to, deal with. You know,
Absolutely.
you mentioned that you was 52, and I know folks are not going to believe that. And so a lot of men, as we get older, our hormones change,
Yeah.
testosterone gets lower. And recently there was a video that kind of went viral with Omarion. He's a singer and he's now 40 and his body has changed. And there was a lot of criticism about the change in his body. And he has, I think, what they call a dad bod. He had like extra fat in his chest and his stomach. And I think sometimes we've used that as, as an excuse to say, okay, I have a dad bod because I'm older, and as if to say there's nothing we can do about that. As we get older, and I know that that, like for me, what worked to get in shape when I was in my 30s is different at 57.
Yeah.
So what should we be doing as men to stay in shape so we don't, get the dad bod?
Yeah. I love this. So, number one, understanding a little bit about the cycles are important. I read a stat, it was staggering. It was something like 99% of men over the age of 32 will never sprint again in life.
32. Wow.
32. And when I read that, I was like, never run your fullest power again after 32? Like,
Mhm,
but the body begins to shift around 32.
mhm,
You start to lose muscle mass and bone density. And it's a certain percentage every 10 years. But it's significant and it increases after 40.
mhm,
So when you look at what muscle does in the body, muscle is powerful. It is the stability. So we say things like core, but what we're talking about is muscle. The same thing with fat loss. We underestimate the role that muscle plays in fat loss.
mhm,
It is a stabilizing organ that produces hormones and all kind of stability in so many ways. So as we get older, we're losing muscle mass, we're losing bone density, we're becoming less active, disguised as busy, but we become very sedentary. We do, and when we do exercise, it's little cute stuff. We're not really hitting all the fitness requirements that the body needs. Then you add to that a diet of refined foods, processed foods loaded with these fetal estrogens and all these toxins and chemicals that are disrupting, they're hormone disruptors. Oh, that was thunder.
That's all. Why?
That was a
Look,
bang.
I thought that was an effect you had. I'm like,
It's like disruptors, but all of these hormone disruptors
Mhm,
are throwing the balance between estrogen and testosterone, and like it's off. So because we're not eating properly, we are not moving, and fitness is not proper. And then you add the stress that we carry. It A dad bod is a nice way of saying it, but at the end of the day, you start to lose control over your temple,
mm.
you know.
And so what should brothers be doing
Yeah.
to?
So there's 50 essential factors that we should be getting from our nutrition,
Mhm,
right? There's 20 to 21, right? Like right off the top, there's 20 to 21 minerals that we should be concentrating on getting,
mhm,
right? There's 13 vitamins that we should be getting into our body, not necessarily daily, but definitely weekly. Like it doesn't have to be in one day, but as we go out throughout the course of the week, these should be accumulative, right? Then there is 8 amino acids and 2 fatty acids. That is the 50 essential factors that we all need to get in our nutrition alone. So these are things the body won't produce. I don't care how well or how healthy you are, your body's not going to produce iron. Your body's not going to produce zinc or selenium. These are factors we have to get from nutrition. So we have to be mindful. Instead of just eating to be full or satisfied, we have to put some thought into the nutrients that we're actually getting from the food. And to say green leafy vegetables, great. To say, plant-based foods, but there needs to go a little bit further. As a man, you're going to need zinc to have a healthy hormonal system. Where does zinc come from? That's pumpkin seeds, right? For example. So when we're thinking in terms of that, where are you getting your healthy fats? Very, very important, right? So if we would turn our attention toward eating a healthy, whole food based diet, then that would be a massive turnaround because now we're getting the necessary nutrients, right, to counteract the muscle loss and the bone loss. We're getting the calcium, we're getting all the things that the body needs. So the body doesn't have to take protein out the muscle, take calcium out the teeth and bones. Right? We're providing the body what it needs. Then what doesn't move breaks. So the movement aspect, the fitness aspect, we cannot skip that. Men have to work out. You have to counteract muscle loss. You have to counteract metabolic syndrome and disease with activity, from strength training to cardiovascular, endurance and movement activity. You want your flexibility. They have scientists now that can tell just about your lifespan by grip, how tight your grip is, you know. So those are the key factors: the movement and the fitness, the diet, and stress management. We have to find a way to properly manage our stress load.
And one of the things that I hear from so many brothers, like even in their 30s, they talk about erectile dysfunction. What do you wish more men knew about erectile dysfunction?
That it starts way before their member doesn't rise. That is, you have ignored so many factors. Harold, on this topic, it dawned on me that we hate the law of fornication. We hate that concept because we think it's stealing pleasure from us. When the whole ideal is you have this seed of fertility and it's trying to suggest to you that you shouldn't just spill it all over the place. We as men, so many men early on, they learn how to pleasure themselves in this way and they just run with it nonstop, no control. Anybody can get it. And as a result, you are losing your vitality. You're losing your seed over and over. There is so much nutrients inside of semen. And after a while, you're depleting your resources. You are not taking care of yourself hormonally, nutritionally, all the things. You're not taking care of yourself, your blood pressure is becoming challenged. Hypertension is coming in because you're eating these foods with these lipids and fats that are clogging arteries. The pineal gland is not difficult to clog. And when you have erectile dysfunction, it is often like a doctor, although your concern, if you go to a doctor, your concern is going to be, hey, this is not working. The doctor's concern is heart. Let me check the heart. Because if that artery is blocked, it's a sign that there's more blockage going on in larger arteries.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish brothers understood, because for whatever reason, no one teaches us that our body is sacred. Early, I'm talking early. No
Right.
one is saying, protect yourself, take care of yourself. This is sacred. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no one should have access to this part of you until you've decided that, and how to take care of yourself. Eat these foods for good blood circulation,
Mm-hmm.
right? You should spend a certain amount of time grounding and outside. When you're grounding, the earth gives you what they call valence electrons.
Mm.
So free radicals are extremely destructive in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that free radicals are destructive, they help form plaque that clogs arteries. So when you're eating things that has LDL cholesterol and these fats that get clogged up, it's the free radicals that oxidizes it and turns it into a plaque.
Mm.
It's almost like a form of fermentation, and they turn it into a plaque, and that's what clogs the arteries.
Mm.
But what balances free radicals is the electrons that you get from the earth. So a free radical, a free radical is an incomplete molecule. So it's lacking a valence electron. And what it's doing is taking an electron away from the molecules that it comes into contact with.
Mm.
So by taking our shoes and socks off, grounding on the earth is giving us back valence electrons. And those help complete the molecules and destroy the free radicals. So
Mm.
simple things like that
Right.
is bringing our health back to us if we would take the time, and all the other side, the benefit
Mm-hmm.
of that.
Right.
Calmer spirit, right? More energy, more connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are four things that brothers should really be focusing on, is what I hear you saying: nutrition,
Yes,
strength training,
yes,
breathing,
yes.
and grounding.
And grounding.
Those are the wow.
Absolutely.
Now you have this program called Heal Without Pills. I love that. Heal Without Pills. Tell us about that program.
Yeah. So you alluded to some things in this conversation, Harold, that's so spot on. It's the thing that I'm trying to describe and emphasize to Black men in particular is that healing takes time. And so often we have these programs and people are pushing offers that's like, drink this tonic, do this thing, do that thing, and get healed like immediately. And that's no different than what doctors are saying. Take this pill, do this, and give it 2 weeks, you're good. And some of this damage that we have has taken years and years of accumulation. And it's going to take time for the healing factor.
Mhm.
So I like the ideal of reintroducing, hey, if we do these things, your body will respond, but this is not an overnight thing, but it has to start somewhere. So Heal Without Pills is a program. It's a 5-day challenge. And what I've done is I've identified those four things that we talked about. I've identified a simplistic way to take people from where they're at and show them how they can implement these simple steps. Not break it all the way down, like how your meal should be structured Instead of just saying, you got to eat right and eat plant.
Right.
How should that plate be structured? Percentages, like how much carbs, how much healthy fats, how much proteins, what should it look like? What should my first meal look like? When should I eat? How often should I eat? Like, I take the guesswork out of that and I structure that. And I do this for 5 days. I implement how you should eat. I implement how you should think about fitness. I give you a basic program. And my goal is to show a person how to get quick wins. This program, the 5-day challenge, is not complete transformation. It's to show you, wow, this is what can happen in 5 days. I've dropped a couple pounds. I'm seeing the needle change. And that should be enough encouragement to then take the next step toward a more complete transformation.
Right. Oh, wow. So now, Coach, how can people find you on social media? Because I know they're going to want to get in contact with you and connect with you. How can they do that? On Instagram, TikTok? What's your...
So I'm Rashan Fuller across. Underscore Rashan Fuller on Instagram, Rashan Fuller on Facebook, Rashan Fuller on TikTok, so LinkedIn. So pretty much across the board, Rashan Fuller spelled out is where you're going to find me on social media.
Awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for just having this very important conversation to remind us all that change is possible and healing is possible. But, we got to do the work. We got to do the work.
And thank you for the work you're doing. I really appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate you for presenting it.